4 industry top 100 prospect lists have made their way onto the internet, and that means it's a perfect time for us to dig into where they agree, where they disagree, maybe where they're split. And in doing that, we're going to dig into about 9 prospects who made it onto these top 100s and examine their underlying Statcast data, dig into what makes them good, perhaps some arguments pro and con for or against them, and it'll be a lot of fun. This first sheet right here is an aggregation. We could call it the agreements section. These are guys that are ranked on all 4 lists with the corresponding rank on that individual list. I have the average rank here, the standard deviation of that rank on the left side. You'll see there's a lot of consensus among the top names, which is pretty understandable because a lot of these sources are talking to individuals in organizations, and a lot of the time it's hard to get massive disagreement inside like the top 50 or so. ESPN, MLB Pipeline, which is MLB.com, The Athletic, and Baseball America are my 4 sources here. The Athletic and Baseball America, both behind paywalls. I encourage you to get subscriptions to both of those sites. They do awesome work. I'm going to do my best not to just completely divulge what they have as their top 100, but I'm going to pull some data in here just to get us some talking points. And we'll start by digging into a couple bats here. Again, this is the agreement side of things, so it's almost more digging into the logic behind perhaps why these guys were ranked. We're going to look at a few hitters off the top, 2 shortstops, and then an outfielder. We'll start with George Lombard, but just to give you some idea of how position and age influence some of these numbers, I wanted to pull up this board right here on various statistics and how they change based on position. So the big thing to point out here is a lot of the up the middle positions, second base, shortstop, even center field to some extent, they just aren't impacting the ball as hard as, say, first baseman or corner outfielder, as you see up here. And that's not totally surprising, right? Defensive value on the up the middle positions has some impact overall on the level of bat and level of offense you need in order to be successful. And then you also see based on age, if you're 19 or 20, as you ascend to get to that 23 or 24 age, the 90th percentile exit velocity, which I'll be referencing a lot in this video, is essentially a proxy for bat speed. Because we don't have bat speed below AAA, this is kind of the way to back into it. Pretty strong correlation at the major league level between 90th percentile exit velocity and a hitter's raw bat speed. You see that ages up a bit. So if you're 19 or you're 20, you're going to add about a tick and a half by the time you're 23 or 24. Obviously, some variance based on body type, force production, variety of those angles. Just keep that stuff in mind as we dig into George Lombard off the top. Fascinating rank here because he was 20 last year. He got up to AA. Some people say that was an aggressive assignment. Overall, his day looks pretty good. Now, I think he's expected to stick at shortstop. He's a really hyper-athletic, dynamic player. Some of his data, though, if you're just purely going off of, hey, how does he impact the ball? How does he do from like a swing decision standpoint? How much contact does he make? It's pretty average for a minor league shortstop, as you see the averages down here. He doesn't impact the ball crazy hard. He's a little bit above average. We can expect that to age up. So if that ages up to the 105 area, which would be around the 75th percentile in Major League Baseball, that's in a decent spot. Like he could still post probably average to above average offensive numbers. And on a lot of the evaluators that I've been seeing on him think he has way more juice to be had. So that's something to consider here. The thing I will point out, I'm not entirely sure if this is something that's immutable, but a player's chase rate is something that I don't think a lot of people in the industry assume is very malleable. Bat speed, really malleable. Perhaps swing decisions, you could even say, where you're impacting in the zone. But chase, I'd say, correlates more to just raw pitch recognition. And Lombard's is really strong. So that, to me, is almost the more interesting thing here, is not that he's right around average on the exit velocity side of things and that most of his data looks okay. It's not like crazy exceptional. It's more that if you project all this stuff to go forward and he sticks at shortstop, the chase here is really good. Like he has a really good eye for the zone. It's just more to me, you see zone contact here, even zone whiff a bit above average. And again, whiff versus 95 miles per hour plus, which you didn't see a lot of. And of course, we're expecting him to adjust. There is a hole to some extent in his swing. He was really crushed by anything up in the zone. He had a 45% whiff rate in the upper third. In zone, upper third, he was around 40% whiff. The averages there are about like 17 percentage points lower. So not particularly good. I would argue that the chase is really good, but perhaps there's a subtle hole in his swing in terms of how his path works that maybe the Yankees are going to try to clean up. And that could really unlock the ultimate upside that we're perhaps looking for here in him as a player. So to me, that's the angle I'm looking at for him is how does the whiff fare in the upper third of the zone? How does that age out? We could take a look at his swing as well. There's an obvious comp here that we could bring up. I'm sure there's other comps that are more appropriate. I never like comping to a guy who's maybe an eventual Hall of Famer, but as you watch him, that swing in particular reminds me of Mike Trout. Yes, obviously, he's not Mike Trout, but I think that the general gather in his swing, how he moves, pretty reminiscent, especially that two-handed follow-through. Usually two-handed follow-through on higher pitches, one-handed on lower pitches. He has an ability, even this ball's more like mid up. You know, he's two-handing everything. So that to me is reminiscent of Mike Trout in some ways, but it's a pretty good swing overall. Like, it's really compact. You know, I don't see anything from the hitting analysis side of things that suggests he has this massive hole up in the zone, but that's what the data is showing. So that's something for him to potentially clean up. He's entering his age 21 season next year. Let's look at another really young guy, Jesus Mate here. So Mate is fascinating because he's crazy young. And I was just talking about George Lombard. He's a pretty big dude, as we saw from some of that video. Mate is smaller, and he has some crazy raw exit velocities here on the 90th percentile side of things. He's entering his age 19 season. Last year, he had a 105 90th percentile, which again is right around that 75th percentile in the major leagues. Now, everything else in his data very similar to a guy like George Lombard. There's nothing that really jumps out. He's not lifting the ball as much as we'll see from his swing. It's a little more like line drive grooved. Again, people expect that to adjust over time. His swing is a little passive. He makes a good amount of contact. You know, there's nothing dramatically different about anything he does here relative to average. He's decent versus spin, decent versus fade. The reason he is a consensus top 3 or 4 prospect in baseball is he's 18 years old. He's going to be age 19 season next year. You know, he is kind of exceptional. He's a switch hitter. It's expected to be plus defense at shortstop as well. Lombard was in that same plus category. I think the switch hitting element and the raw bat speed we see, specifically given the age and the fact that even he got up to AA and didn't have as many glaring holes, I would say, as a George Lombard, is really one of the reasons why he's so fascinating. We can also look, if you pull, let's say, guys that are age 18 season who are able to see around like 500 or more pitches in high A or higher, you get about 10 of these, 15 of these a year, right in that window, let's say. And it's fun to rank those guys by 90th percentile exit velocity. You get names like Junior Caminero, Connor Griffin, the number 1 prospect in baseball, Sebastian Walcott, Bryce Eldred, Samuel Basayo, that's Jackson Chourio, another Brewer, Roman Anthony, Colt Emerson. It's a good list to be on, right? Young dude at an advanced full season affiliate, able to impact the ball as hard as Jesus Mate does, is really impressive. You could sort through some of the other data here. Nothing dramatically that jumps out. Then we'll look at a more polished guy here in Carson Benge from the Mets, who it seems like David Stearns is going to give a shot to win in opening day. Or actually, you know what we could do first? We can look at Jesus Mate's swing. I wanted to show you that quick. Left side and right side, really fluid, kind of like an interesting rhythmic tapping of his bat there. It's not like a bat wrap. It's more like a bounce, I would say. But very line drive oriented. This ball, he scalded. I love that swing, inner third. See him from the open side here. Decent, you know, into his legs. Lower body, not a massive leg kick, probably thigh high. Really, really smooth swing. He's really dynamic athlete, super fun. 18 years old to be impacting the ball as he is really impressive. Benge is a very different kind of prospect. Next year will be his age 23 season. And this is where you start to get to the area of you're like, yeah, okay, he impacts the ball really hard. The raw ex-wob on contact, which is essentially like a really good all-encompassing stat that some teams use to just determine offensive production for guys, because you're looking at expected metrics based on launch angle and exit velocity, and then everything here checks out for Benge. Especially, I love the zone contact, zone whiff. Zone contact's above average, zone whiff's below average, and he's impacting the ball this hard. You'll also see down here, he doesn't whiff a lot versus velocity. He crushes spin from the left side. Decent job versus fade as well. He's a tough guy to get out. There isn't like a raw game plan here of like Lombard has that hole up in the zone, just pound him with four-seam fastballs. I did find it interesting also on this angle. What did I have here? Zone contact over 85% and 105 plus on the 90th percentile exit velocity side of things. That's about 1% of minor league hitters. And you get a group of Jack Caglione, Kevin McGonigal, really good prospect for the Tigers, Luis Matos, Dylan Beavers, Moises Ballesteros. Again, really good grouping of guys to be on in terms of a list. The other thing that I find fascinating with him, if you were to look at his heat map, he does a really good job on the inner third of the plate. His expected slug inner third this most recent season was about 511. The league average is 100-ish points lower than that. And the outer half for him is around 351, so a little bit below average. A lot of lefties do a better job on the inner third of the plate. Benge in particular crushes the inner third of the plate. And I'm curious to see how passive he is away. There are some hitters in Major League Baseball, I think of Kyle Tucker in particular, who do a good job crushing inner third, really passive outer third, and are really productive hitters overall. So I think that is like a template for Benge to follow. I did find it interesting. Someone mentioned to me, I was asking a hitting an analyst in an organization actually about Benge. And I was like, okay, give me a template of hitter. If I give you a template of hitter, and he's crushing the inner third of the plate, kind of struggles outer third of the plate, what are you thinking? Like, is that adjustable? This guy goes, is he a lefty bat? And I say, yes. Is he a left-handed thrower, right-handed thrower? And I thought that was an interesting question. He said, yeah, if he's a right-handed thrower, which you see a lot of the time is in his swing, the bottom hand in his swing is stronger relative to his top hand. And that causes some differences in how his bat paths through the zone and his ability to kind of turn in or third. So I don't know if that's backed up by data, but I thought it was an interesting anecdote that this guy brought up. And Benge, of course, as you see right here, is a right-handed thrower. Something to consider. Really fun prospect. Top 20 guy consensus. I definitely agree with that. And here's Carson Benge. So Benge, let's see a swing. It is a lot of movement relative to some of the other guys we were talking about. It's very much in that Jesus Mate window, I would say. Pretty smooth. He's really like emphatic in his follow through. There's a big gather too. We'll look at it from the side in terms of how he moves, like his center of mass moves. You hear that idea of like he's swinging a phone booth, Adley Rutschman swing. Benge is like drifting back into back leg, really far gather forward. So it's impressive to me he maintains some of the zone contact metrics that he's showing despite that. Really fun prospect. I like him a lot. 3 batters there. You get the whole range of some shortstops to a pretty advanced outfielder. How about a pitcher? Ryan Sloan is a fascinating dude. A lot of strikes, really young. He's entering his age 20 season next year. This is a cool little plot that I rendered out. Could give you an idea of like what he's doing from a release height standpoint. It's 5.6. Here's his shapes. He's throwing like this shorter cutter-ish pitch and then a larger sweeper. It's got a pretty nasty splitter down at 1,000 RPM. Sitting 95. We'll look at his delivery in a second. I think it's fantastic. He's a really easy guy to add like a sinker on. The fastball is 14 and 7, so it's not a really good shaped fastball. It's more of like an approach angle fastball, despite the fact it's kind of like a steeper approach into the zone. So this is very much like a repertoire diversity play for me. I think the 4-seam will come down, way down in usage as he advances. He's throwing every 7th day right now, so there's also some workload implications around him. But people just love this dude from a raw, how does he look? How does he move? The velo he's holding, the strikes he's throwing. Again, that for pitchers is probably a bit more like the immutable trait, kind of like chase rate as we were talking about on the hitting prospect side of things. 6'6", 230 as well. Like this dude's 20 years old. He's really fun. There's a lot of variance in high school pitchers, though, I will point out. Perhaps that's a concern for some people around his profile. So Sloan here. I love this. Look at how quick he is to the places from the stretch. Boom. I'm not going to time that out, but it's got to be sub 1.5, maybe 1.4. He's really, really quick to the plate. You'll see his delivery here from the windup coming up. Fastball down. A little bit different here. There's a split. Nasty pitch. He's just, I think he's really fluid. He hinges really well out of his delivery, out of leg lift here, as you'll see. Gathers down the mound really well. I just think it's really smooth. I'll watch at full speed here. I love his delivery. Like, I'm not a big biomechanics guy from understanding like what he's doing perhaps differently than other guys. He's not like a pretty, his front leg accepts force really nicely, as you can see there. But you'll see a lot of guys like kick into like front leg, or at least call it like lead knee extension of that front leg. Not for Sloan. He's just like kind of flexed. And I wonder if that helps him keep kind of the lower delivery and the lower slot from a release height standpoint. Again, he's a little bit below average of 5.6. So fascinating pitcher, really young. He's consensus. Let me see, what do people have on him here? Consensus top 60. 3 of the 4 sources have him top 35. So he is a really fun pitching prospect that I'm fascinated to see. These are the names now as we transition over here to 2 lists. These guys appeared on 2 lists, not on the other 2. So kind of, you could say these are guys that are split on, and I have some thoughts on them overall. I will mention there's a couple other guys here. Braylon Doty, Trey Gibson are 2 guys I wrote up in my Substack. So if you enjoy what I'm talking about here, my Substack's a pretty good place for you to really nerd out on what I'm saying. This is, I would say a lot of the time, a little more distilled down. Attract the average-ish fan that's pretty into the nerd space. But this is like the deep of the deep. I encourage you to check that out. I'll be putting a lot of things behind the paywall as we get to 2026. So if it's $5 a month, $30 a year, there's a small free trial as well. Some hitting analysis there I just dropped. Every single day as we get into the season, I'll be doing pitcher notes, which are really fun for me to do. I really enjoy. So check that out. That's where I talk about guys like, let's see right here, Trey Gibson and Braylon Doty. But I want to talk about Sykora and Kendry Chourio here. Sykora is injured. I totally get it. He's a tough rank from that perspective, where he's going to miss most of 2026. So how do you rank a guy that's not going to throw? I totally understand that. Despite that, he is interesting enough for ESPN and MLB Pipeline to put him top 60 here, which implies he's about roughly like a top 20 pitching prospect, despite the fact he basically is rehabbing from Tommy John right now. Fascinating pitcher. I wouldn't say he's Trey Savage. I'd say he's actually more in the Paul Skeens sphere, but he doesn't create glove side shapes really well. Again, spin capacity is relatively low at 2,300, but throws really hard. And the big thing I'll point out here, so I was fascinated to look because he's such a big dude at 6'6", 230. He's got 6'7" extension, and he's down to his 6-foot release height. That's a little weird because I peg his arm angle at around 20 degrees, and I was looking, There's less than 50 pitches thrown in 2025 from a 20-degree arm angle that were released at a release height of 6 feet or higher. So the angle his ball's coming out, like the point in space where he's throwing the ball from, is something that basically doesn't exist. I think that's a really interesting advantage for a pitcher. And maybe that alone is a reason to kind of vault him up into the top 50, 60 on a lot of lists. He's a fascinating guy. It's 4-seam slider split. I really don't think this is like a repertoire diversity angle. I very much think it's more just like an interesting guy who is throwing a really interesting slot. So look at his delivery here, and you'll see what I mean by Paul Skeens. Really lanky dude, but does this like coil, kind of hunches over posturally out of leg lift. Has very similar, like this shot is very much Paul Skeensian in terms of how he throws, front arm pretty extended, really tight arm circle, super high elbow hike. I wonder if his arm is actually a little bit late there as he gets down. Yeah, you could almost argue it's a little bit late in terms of he's not flipping up right when his front foot starts to accept force. Again, going to defer to the biomechanic guys to point this out. But this is what I'm talking about. Like the point in space he's releasing the ball from should be right here, like there. Let me see if I get it there. Okay, that's 6 feet in the air, and his arm angle's at 20 degrees. You're only gonna be able to achieve this when you're super tall and you have a decent amount of extension. So that, I think, is his singular advantage. We could distill him down as a pitcher into that. Nasty, nasty slider right there. I think there's a split coming up. Yeah, that's sick. Really fun pitcher. There's his delivery. Super lanky dude. Again, coiling a ton. It's weird. It's a little wacky. Let me see if I could grab that. Is his arm late angle? I mean, it's maybe close. It's close relative to guys who flip up really early. I don't know if that's a concern. It's just something to point out with him, I would say, overall. And again, what we're talking about here from that release point standpoint, you're like, does it matter? Zone whiff is crazy. Running 25% zone whiff on the 4-seam, 44% on the slider, 61% on the split. Those pitches are out of zone a bit, but if they're in zone, it's just such a weird approach on everything he throws. Fascinating pitcher. I think that he's deserving of a top 100 rank despite the fact he's down with Tommy John surgery. Maybe I would have him more in like the 50 to 100 window. Kennedy Chourio is also fascinating for a very different reason. He's undersized, small dude, but his age, he was age 17 last season, which is pretty much unprecedented to throw like 300 plus pitches in your age 17 season in the last 4 or 5 years from what I was looking at. The name that you could comp him to is Yuri Perez, who back in 2021 in his age 18 season threw like 71% strikes. Chourio is like a strike machine, 74% strikes in the two levels. I think he's complex, then he jumped into the low A affiliate of the Royals here. He's very consolidated in his repertoire, but this is purely just like this guy has incredible zone feel, and as a result of that, we can project him pretty aggressively going forward. So we like him. You know, this is what, let's see who are the two lists that had him. The Athletic and Baseball America are essentially saying that. It's interesting. I think that there's a couple outcomes. Like Yuri Perez isn't the only outcome here. Charlie Soto is another name for the Twins, who also posted a really high strike rate at decent velo. He was 95 plus as well in 2024, and then he ran into a bunch of injuries last year. So pitching prospects are really hard, I think, to peg and figure out long term. I get the bet here on a guy who is throwing a lot of strikes. I personally would rather defer on a guy like this for a bit longer and watch him evolve, because he's not running the crazy stuff that a guy like Yuri Perez is, for example. I like Yuri Perez's fastball shape. Kennedy Chourio's fastball shape is going to back up a lot. He's 15-7 right now. As he touches the major league ball, that's probably going to come down to like 14.5 and 6. So this plot you're seeing right here, the 4-seam to change, which is a really good pitch. I like the change the most. And then the curveball. Spin capacity is decent enough where you can project probably like a cutter and a slider and a sinker. This mix is going to look very different. And for me, I would prefer to wait and defer and just assume that happens over time, as opposed to right now saying this guy's already like a top 75 pitching prospect in baseball, which means he would be probably a top 25, 30 pitching prospect. It's a little aggressive for me. I get being out ahead on him. My preference is to defer on a guy like this and prefer a guy like Sykora, even though he's injured. So Chourio's next year is going to be fascinating to see. Also because A-ball is not really good from a hitter standpoint. So the other thing to point out with Kennedy Chourio is he's very compact. He's a small dude. He's around 6 feet. It's a clean delivery. It's really clean. And it looks good. Like, it's really timed up well. Just aesthetically pleasing. There's guys in baseball you look at and you go, yeah, it's a good delivery. You know, nothing really jumps out about him. He's just a really undersized dude, and I think that to me it's a subtle knock. So nothing dramatic there, but I did want to show you that I did have his delivery in there. But fascinating. We went to 2 pitchers right there. 3 lists. So these are guys that are incorporated on 3 lists and left off of 1 list. I'm not going to dig too deep into these guys. I get it from like a draft standpoint. Javier Arquette, Bremner's another one in the recent draft. Those guys are tough to peg. Lazaro Montes is a fascinating one. This guy's tough. So I agree with Kyle McDaniel leaving him off for the point being that only one hitter last year in Major League Baseball had a 90th percentile exit velocity up above this 107 mark, which is really getting into like, you absolutely torch the ball. But did that and also had a sub 70% zone contact rate. We're talking about Gabriel Arias of the Guardians because he's a great shortstop. He's a good shortstop defender. That's why he survived in the major leagues with that low of a zone contact rate. There's a couple of these guys that exist in the minor leagues. So how you feel about a Lazaro Montes is how you feel about a Spencer Jones or an Elijah Green. Also guys who torch the ball, but have just abysmal zone contact, overall contact rates. They whiff a ton. They whiff in the zone a ton. You know, Montes's chase is fine. It's really more of like a in-zone path problem. And given how hard he swings, is it even worth kind of like trying to adjust it? It's a very good question. Whiffing versus velocity, whiffing versus spin, whiffing versus fade. He's a really tough one for me to be like, yeah, that guy's a top 100 prospect. I get he torches the ball, but I think from a precedent standpoint, these guys, especially as a lefty, he's never going to face left-handed pitching. The bar is very high for him to clear to end up being like a top 50 prospect or producing enough value to run like 2.5 WAR a season. I always think of a guy like Rhys Hoskins, who's not similar to Montes in a lot of ways, but power hitting righty first baseman who had some really good years and was still barely eclipsing 2 WAR. These profiles are tough to push into what you'd call like the promised land of having a ton of ROI. And I'm not convinced that his bat is going to make enough contact for him to survive in the major leagues. So we'll say, I feel like the league is maybe even pushing a bit more towards like contact, not at the expense of slug, but preferring like that balance of both. And a guy like Montes, a guy like Spencer Jones are not that at all. They're missing a lot of balls in the zone. And to me, that is somewhat of a problem. All right, lastly here, we will talk on guys who are only on one list. I have 2 guys I'm going to point out here. Again, similar situation of like Vaheva Aloy, Fiend as well. 2 guys. Fiend was in the Gore trade, but Vaheva Aloy was a recent draftee. I get it. I get people just deferring on the draftees. It's kind of like I was deferring on the young pitching prospect in Kendry Chourio. 2 guys we'll talk about right here, Khal Steven and Tyson Lewis, are only on one list. Again, I'm going to agree with Kylie ranking Khal Steven and disagree with the Tyson Lewis. We'll start with Tyson Lewis. I disagree. Again, we didn't look at Lazaro Montes. I'll show Lazaro Montes relative to Tyson Lewis. Tyson Lewis is kind of your dude, and he torches the ball. But my God, he's chasing so much. Like, this was between the complex and low A, I believe. He's swinging at everything. 56% swing rate is insanely aggressive. I'm not entirely sure if his whole motto was just like, hey, I'm going to swing at everything, and I'm going to absolutely torch some balls. But at the same time, it's tough to project a profile like this. Is he sticking at shortstop? Again, he would fit nicely into that, even like Gabriel Arias mode, again, if he could stick at short and play this kind of game. But if we think that chase is harder to adjust, I find it difficult for him to become a guy that you would be like punchy aggressive on of like, man, this guy's a top 50 prospect without the ability to not chase and make more contact. He's not as bad as like a Lazaro Montes, but let's look at those swings. So here's Montes. Montes is just a huge human. It's crazy bats, but this ball just like stays up. It got to the right fielder so quick. That ball is torched. I don't know how this didn't get out. It hits the top of the wall. But his swing is a little long. You'll see it from the open side in a second. You know, it's an aesthetically gorgeous swing. I mean, he torches the ball. He's a huge dude too, so it's not totally surprising. But yeah, there's a lot of zone miss there. So the crazy thing, on average, 90th percentile exit velocity we're talking about here. Where's Tyson Lewis? Here's Tyson Lewis. Smaller dude, right? You know, he's small. He's not Lazaro Montes, let's say that. And he's hitting some absolute tanks in terms of his raw bat speed. Very much like Gunnar Henderson-y, I would say, especially with like that helmet flip up. Upright stance, a lot of movement, coils out pretty nicely. This ball's torch left center. This ball was tagged. And we'll see his swing from open face right here. Again, he's not like gathering as much as we were talking about like a Benge and some of these other guys. He's staying back really nicely. I love his swing. It's really, again, just a matter of trying to understand how viable a 38% chase rate in the major leagues is on a guy like this. Remains to be seen. I'm not entirely sure. But I will disagree with his rank inside the top 100, but he is a fun name to kind of put a pin in. Khal Steven was traded for Shane Bieber, and what I thought was a pretty good trade by the Guardians. If you're not going to, I mean, I was surprised Bieber ended up taking his option. Maybe that makes the trade a little more even for the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays needed an arm. They almost won the World Series. Flags fly forever. So, but Khal Steven's a great get for Shane Bieber. This dude throws a ton of strikes again. He added a cutter with the Guardians really late. It's already a pretty deep mix. The sweeper here is not a pretty frequent pitch, but the slider's sick. There's the cutter he added late. He's got a nasty splitter. He sits 93, so it's not primo velo, but he's a really big dude. He's in the zone a ton. He's throwing a lot of strikes. I love the combo of strikes here alongside the fact that the slider, curve, split are all generating a pretty good amount of miss. It's a little bit higher of a slot here. He's up at a 6.1 foot release. Pretty good extension, 6'6", so he's an above average arm angle guy. Not totally surprising when you see the four seam shape at like 19.8 inches of vertical break. That'll come down to probably 18.5 or so. But it's a big downhill plane, over the top guy with a good enough mix from a depth standpoint that I love projecting him out. You'll see how big he is right here. He's a big dude, super downhill plane, throws really hard. I wouldn't say it's like a violent delivery, but he reminds me a bit of like Gavin Williams in terms of how he moves. So perhaps some similarities there in how the Guardians perceive guys from a development standpoint. Nasty curve. I think that's the cutter right there. A couple different shapes. Here's him from the open side. Very different than a guy like Sloan. Pretty over the top. He's drifting a little more down the mound as opposed to sitting into his back leg as much as a guy like Sloan. But really fun. I think he's super high floor. I'm not entirely sure what the ceiling is there, but if he mimics the Gavin Williams trajectory and is as good as Gavin Williams was, that's a huge win for me from the Guardians' perspective. So hope this was fun, rattling through some guys, talking about some of these top prospects in baseball, showing you some data, some of my new exports here. I started doing some, in a past video, we're almost going to end this here, but in a past video I mentioned I was going to take up learning Python. I didn't. Unfortunately, I delayed it too much, but the procrastination paid off because I learned how to use Claude development, playing around with some AI stuff, and I gotta tell you, it does a pretty good job in terms of allowing to cover the gaps of Python and me not having to know all these things. So I have this ability to create these cool screenshots now, which are a good way for me to visualize some of the data that I normally just point at. So I hope these help a bit. I gotta change a couple things in them. They're not perfect, but they're fun. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks a ton for checking it out, talking some prospects here. And shout out to my Substack, shout out to The Athletic and Baseball America, where I encourage you to check out subscriptions. They do awesome stuff.